Hello, welcome to the first part in looking at the kind of four main Russian cruisers. We're not going to be looking at Komisar or Smolensk. We're going to look at the four 12-kilometer radar cruisers, the Nevsky, Petro, Moskva, and Stalingrad. They all kind of have a lot of similarities. Obviously quite a few differences, but overall, very, very similar in terms of concealment, maneuverability, armor type. Um, they kind of all have the icebreaker 25 upper bow situation. Um, and we're looking at Nevsky first, and Nevsky is kind of a weird one in this group. Nevsky is weird for a few reasons. Number one, it's kind of a light cruiser and it's kind of a heavy cruiser. Um, it gets heavy cruiser concealment, 12.8 kilometer concealment, which is the best of the four by a little bit. It's a little better than Petro, and it's about 1.2 kilometers better than Moskva Stalin. But it's thoroughly heavy cruiser, right? I mean, this is worse. This is worse concealment than Hindenburg. It's about on par with Henry. Much worse than the U.S. heavy cruisers. Obviously, and especially in World of Warships 2024, you are thoroughly deep into battleship concealment. If you look at the matchmaker, Duncan outspots Nevsky. Vermont outspots Nevsky. North Carolina, assuming he built for full concealment, outspots Nevsky. Um, this is obviously like extremely, extremely problematic for a ship that is a light cruiser. Now, light cruiser is kind of in quotes because Nevsky does, in many ways, have closer to heavy cruiser armor. Um, you have an exposed belt of about 140. And then a bit of spacing, and then you have your Citadel belt. It is quite above water, but you do have some spaced armor with a total of like 180 protection for the Citadel when you're flat, which is obviously better than most heavy cruisers get. You give a 25 millimeter bow with an icebreaker, so you are basically impossible to Citadel through the nose when close in, which is something that most heavy cruisers are susceptible. A lot of them, like Des Moines and some of these other cruisers. So, um, in theory, you have this good armor. Now, the problem really lies in the 25 upper belt and the 30 deck. And that's not to say that this is worse than light cruisers. Obviously, things like Worcester are kind of the same. Um, most of the other light cruisers do have objectively worse plating than Nevsky, but the problem with Nevsky's armor being technically improved is that in a lot of situations, there's just not really a way to make use of the improvements the armor has. Um, you don't, again, you have very poor concealment even for heavy cruisers. You have poor maneuverability even for heavy cruisers. Um, you don't really bring any improved maneuverability over the other three Russian cruisers we're going to look at, and they're all heavy cruisers, heavily armored, heavy cruiser guns. The guns of the Nevsky are also kind of bizarre because you're kind of exactly halfway between 150 millimeter guns that most light cruisers get, or even lower, and the 203s or more that most heavy cruisers get. Um, and you retain light cruiser penetration. Despite these being 180 millimeter guns, you only have 30 mil pen. Um, and then your AP, on the other hand, while it doesn't really do heavy cruiser damage, you're kind of closer, right? You do 4450, which is getting close to what most heavy cruisers do. And then the penetration on the AP on the Nevsky is actually like fairly absurd. Um, it's really good. It's better than most heavy cruisers. Just kind of for reference, out to medium long range, like say 15 kilometers, you have more AP penetration than Venezia. Zhao, you have much more than like Hindenburg does. So um, you can actually Citadel. You can Citadel even heavy cruisers out to quite a long range. There's almost really no range where, like in a Moskva, a Des Moines, or something like that, you can go flat to a Nevsky. Um, Now, like Moskva and unlike Petrov and Stalingrad, the AP does not have improved penetration angles, but it does, especially for the caliber, have like absurd AP pen. You have railgun velocity, and then you obviously have this excellent utility suite. You have a 40-second 12 km radar, a standard hydro, um, and the Nevsky is just it's it's a very interesting ship, but I think the best way that I have to sum up Nevsky is in about 90% of situations you're worse than Moskva, and that's most of what that's kind of most of what my gripes with Nevsky. Not even gripes. I mean, it's a good ship. And I'm talking about random battles. Obviously, in something like clan battles or competitive, the Nevsky becomes instantly one of the better ones. And that's because of its ability to deter destroyer pushes on a flank. But the Nevsky kind of has all of the issues that a traditional heavy cruiser gets, such as lower DPM, and lower fire starting and lower pen on the guns, right? 203 millimeter cruisers typically aren't given crazy fire starting. They're not given, but they are given pen. So you have the downsides of heavy cruisers guns, but you also have the downside of light cruisers guns. Like your fire starting for a light cruiser with 30 mil pen is actually fairly bad. It's barely better than Moskva. And then when it comes to things like DPM, the raw DPM of Nevsky is, again, not much better than Moskva. And factoring in that Moskva, of course, gets 32 millimeter pen, that's one factor. Moskva, much like Des Moines versus Worcester, while Worcester has theoretically better HEDPM than Des Moines against battleships, it is effectively the same or worse. Now, Worcester does get crazy fire starting that Des Moines doesn't get, but Nevsky doesn't get that. Nevsky gets fire starting that's very comparable to big bore cruisers. Again, barely better, about 10 to 15% better fire starting than Moskva. Now, part of the problem with that is Nevsky really only effectively puts out any damage when you're getting all of your turrets off, because you do have the ABXY scheme. So the second you're forced to go nose in, the Nevsky is hands down the lowest damage outputting. Even really worse than Stalingrad when you factor in the penetration that Stalingrad gets, the HE pen, the improved AP pen angles. The second you have to go nose in the Nevsky, which you're going to have to do sometimes to mitigate damage, yeah, your DPM obviously gets cut in half, whereas the other Russian cruisers, it only gets cut by a third. So it makes the Nevsky an extremely awkward ship to try to play nose in. And that is, in theory, one of the only benefits the armor has, because when you are kiting and you're getting shot at by 457, ships with 30 millimeter overmatch, the Nevsky's armor offers you nothing over light cruiser armor. In fact, in many ways it is worse, because there's a lot of ways for it to arm shells that other cruisers don't have. The superstructure is heavy cruiser, like it's the size of basically like Moskva Stalingrad superstructure. It's huge compared to most light cruisers. So the only time that Nevsky's armor scheme is truly effectively better than the other light cruisers that you would compare it to is close range nose in. But then the problem is you have no damage output. So you kind of have to make a choice in Nevsky, and this is a choice that you only have to make in Nevsky, right? And the choice you have to make in Nevsky is, there are kind of three roles the ship has, right? Because it has excellent utility. So do you want to utilize your utility? Well, you have to be within 12 kilometers. This is the range where you eat a giant amount of shit because the hull compared to Petro, Moskva, Stalingrad is dog shit. Even if you angle, battleships take giant chunks out of you. So in order to effectively use your utility and utilize your damage output on the ships that you're using your utility on, you need to be within 12 kilometers. And this is anything really under about 15, the Nevsky struggles very heavy in. Uh, Now, obviously, if you are, say, playing against a bad battleship player or cruisers, you can play at closer range and be effective. You can angle, get all your guns off. But in a Moskva, Petro, and Stalingrad, you don't actually have to make this decision because you can go nose in, which gives you very high survivability. It gives you 2/3 of your damage output, and you can play close range and utilize the radar. So Nevsky is kind of in this awkward situation. It's not, if you watch the Puerto Rico video, it's not as bad as Puerto Rico's issue with trying to utilize utility, because you don't burn like Puerto Rico does. But it is definitely a problem at times. And you can see here in this situation, there can actually be quite a downside in having railguns. This position in a U.S. cruiser would be extremely, extremely powerful. I probably would have farmed a solid 50k more damage from this situation. So the railgun arcs are not always an asset. There's certainly an asset open water radar and destroyers. And in fairness to Nevsky, assuming you are able to be open water with all your guns on target, it is kind of objectively the worst radar in the game to be caught in because 12 kilometer, 40 seconds, there are longer duration radars, but not only are the longer duration radars a shorter range of 10 kilometers, but the ships that have the longer range duration on the radar don't have railguns, right? Like Des Moines shooting at 10 kilometers is going to probably, is easier to dodge than Nevsky at 12, basically, is how I would put it. So while you do have this excellent utility and you are probably the scariest ship to get caught in by a radar, and another benefit of the railguns, of course, like all the other Russian cruisers, is that very fast gunboats have a very, very hard time fucking with you, which is definitely not true of like U.S. utility cruisers. Marceau, Kleb, these Ragnar, all these gunboats that farm in the, say 12 to 15 kilometer range are extremely, extremely difficult to deal with in ships like Des Moines. Whereas in Nevsky, they're not difficult to deal with at all. But the issue with Nevsky again is the issue I have with it personally is your hull is objectively inferior to all the other Russian cruisers. Your overall survivability is objectively worse than all of them. Even Stalingrad, that takes 60-second fires because it has so much more HP and better armor, it is most definitely more survivable than you. And yeah, when it comes to utility up close, you have the same utility suite as Moskva, right? You have the same length and duration radar. You have the same hydro, but you don't have the hull. And so the issue with Nevsky kind of becomes, if you play it to maximize your utility, you could kind of just do the exact same thing in Moskva and overall do it better. Now again, I'm stressing this is random battles. Nevsky in a clan battle, a competitive situation, can do things that the Moskva cannot do because the radar is closer to stealth radar, and it does getting all its guns off in a kite punish destroyers harder, right? I'm not arguing that. We're talking about, random battles. Now in rank, Nevsky is worse than Moskva as well, but especially in random battles, if you take central positioning, like on this small map, this island I cover all of A and B, right? And I cover half of C with radar, which is obviously a huge amount of game impact. And it's kind of why I'm just sitting here, because I'm guaranteeing that we're going to win this game. Actually talking about the game and not the ship for a moment. I'm reversing to this island because if you notice where the sub was last spotted, if he wants to get on A, he's going to take this route. And so if I'm close in on this rock here, then the sub can spot me like this. And what I want to do is I want to be invisible until he's deep on A cap, right? And now that we talked about subs briefly, the Nevsky doesn't get ASW planes. And this again is going back to it kind of has every issue a light cruiser has, but also every issue a heavy cruiser has. And the only thing that really compensates for it is this admittedly excellent utility suite and the torpedoes. Now, the torps on Nevsky, if you want my opinion, are the biggest bait in the whole fucking game. Can you use the torp sometimes? Yeah. Here's the problem with Nevsky torps, okay? Because unlike the other Russian cruisers, your entire upper side plating is 25, including the nose. If you want to torp basically any battleship in the game, leaving out Rhode Island and Mecklenburg, okay? If you want to torp any battleship in the game, they're going to take minimum half your HP. They're just going to take half your health. So if you're full HP, yeah, you can probably YOLO a battleship and live. But on this HP pool, 35k, if this Vermont were close and came around a corner on me with all his guns on me and shot me anywhere besides flat waterline, or not flat waterline, but straight on the waterline, he'd kill me. He'd absolutely do my entire 34,000 HP pool I have remaining and one-shot me. The torps are very okay. They're basically German torps that go for 8 kilometers, right? 14.4 1,000 damage, 60 knots. You get 5 of them, they go 8 kilometers. And that 8 kilometer range is surprisingly limiting. You might think, oh, that's better. Like a lot of cruisers only get 6 kilometer torps, like the Germans. There's really just so few situations other than a guy with like room temp IQ YOLOing you in his battleship that you ever get to use them. You just almost never get to use them. Today I'm doing these a little differently. I played 8 games today. I won 6 out of 8, which was pretty good, but we're just going to look at the last 2 replays. I want to show consecutive replays, even though they're in a string of longer ones. And you see there with the AP, like it's pretty good. But if I was in Stalingrad, Petro, or Moskva, I would be dumpstering that CV, obviously much harder with AP. But the utility of the Nevsky is undeniable. I kind of said this in the Worcester video, and there's some comparisons I would make to Nevsky versus the other 3 that I make to Worcester, and that is that as far as just a full utility pay piggy, the Nevsky is the best of these 4, right? And that is down to open water. It's harder for DDs to fuck with you because a Moskva, Stalingrad have about a 2 kilometer buffer concealment to radar range. Petro now, after the quote-unquote nerfs, has a little over 1 kilometer, and Nevsky is 0.8. So can you play around 0.8 detect? Yeah, you can, but obviously it's harder, right? And also Nevsky, the nature of the ship, because of the lower caliber guns, it doesn't benefit from heavy AP like Petro and Stalingrad do. So there's more wiggle room in the captain build to build into the utility, I think, I would also mention. But we're going to jump straight into the second replay and go over a little more about that utility usage on the build. All right, we are in replay 2 here, and we have a flank spawn. Now, anytime in Nevsky, and again, this is reiterating what I said about the choices in playstyle that you kind of uniquely have to make in Nevsky, or at least somewhat differently, to be more fair to the other Russian radar cruisers, is there's kind of 2 options I have here, okay? I can push into barely catch C in radar range and kind of curl out. This will give me vision on the flank if a destroyer pushes, and also a lot of battleships and cruisers kind of push in like this. So it will give me some kiting ability. Now, the issue with that is they have Yamagiri, Harugumo, Sherman, sub. Now the sub is always a mirrored spawn, I believe, so it's pretty much certain the sub is going to be on the 1-2 line, so that's not an issue. Um, but Harugumo and Sherman are not going to be 10 line flanking, right? I mean, that would make no sense. So at most we have the Yamagiri here maybe, and there's really only like basically what, a 1 in 3 chance he's here. So for me to commit on this 10 line flank, the only way my utility is going to be useful is if the Yamagiri is here. And then also only if a battleship is actually pushing. So you see that I'm spotty here, and I've just got unspotted. So that means I got spotted through this crack or around here. That means a DD either came in like this or across the crack. So I am going to hit the radar when I push up. And yeah, it was the second option. He was on the flank and then curled in. But this is what I meant, all right? The Sherman is not going to push. Now, this is a very awkward situation developing. This situation right here, okay, right here. If I am in Petro, Stalingrad, or Moskva, what do I do here? Well, I don't do what I have to do in the Nevsky, which is rush and dive behind the island because my hull is way too fragile. And I don't have front gun damage output that's meaningful to fight this GK. Now, if I was in a Moskva, I would absolutely, or a Petro, I would absolutely 100% take this position right here on this island. I would have utility coverage on the cap, and I would pump out pretty meaningful damage on this GK. He wouldn't really be able to fight a Moskva or a Petra in this situation. My damage output would be too intense for him to deal with. Of course, Nevsky also doesn't have the deck plating, so it suffers very heavy against heavy cruiser HE, which is unique to the rest of the Russians that have improved deck plating. You know, there's only a few cruisers like you know, Germans and British like Hindenburg, Goliath that really fuck with you HE spam wise in Petro, Moskva. Stalingrad obviously burns, but we're talking about the raw pens. Now, fortunately for me, this GK didn't do what he absolutely should have done, because if you notice, my mod tells me who my team has been spotted, so he knows the Yamato is here behind this island. So his only question is a DD here, which obviously there wasn't because he got dark briefly. So he absolutely should have just ran it down on me. He 100% would kill me or force me into the open in front of a Satsuma, which would kill me, right? There's many things he could do. And in this situation, the Nevsky is really just not any better than Moskva. I would say overall arguably worse because, right, like Moskva would have been able to tank the GK, pump out some good damage, and also play the utility game. Basically, the only time Nevsky is truly superior to the other ones is open water utility play. And even then, it's like barely better than Moskva. It's really only better because of the radar buffer range. But I am going to get off this island because I was very concerned about the Zhao, and that's why I did this. Because if I had stayed there and the Zhao pushed me, I would have been completely fucked. But as you can see now, he did not push me. This is kind of twice now, where if any of these guys had balls, I would be fucked. So that's why I ran off the island, is I didn't want the Zhao to know where I was via the Sherman Hydro. So I did kind of risk, you know, Satsuma taking half my ship. But in my mind, if the Zhao had pushed, I would have been completely fucked. And again, the Nevsky is just so dog shit nose in. You can't torp nose in. You have no damage output nose in, especially against battleships. You're okay against destroyers nose in, because even cutting your DPM in half gives you about 100,000 damage per minute, which is slightly better than front gun Petra and Stalin, but actually not better than front gun Moskva. Front gun Moskva actually has more DPM than front gun only Nevsky, which is kind of crazy. But so I'm kind of relocating here, because what I want to do is I want to be in a situation where I can deal with the Sherman and the Zhao, The Zhao, I absolutely will out DPM. Okay, we both pen each other basically everywhere with HE, and then I have a bit better HE damage output, and also much better arcs and turret traverse. So the Zhao trying to fight me in the kite v kite is actually very problematic for him, because he does have a smaller target to aim at just because of the better firing angles. And this is another praise we can sing of Nevsky. The firing angles are actually quite good. Um, there's really no complaints there for me at all. Um, the firing angles are very decent, and I mean you can see the angle like right now we barely can't. These are excellent firing angles, especially compared to Zhao. This is why he can't really fight me because uh, Zhao has infamously dog shit trash firing angles, and anytime he wants to use all his guns, he actually is at serious risk of me using AP against him. Um, Now, I do think he's making like a huge, gigantic mistake because he kind of has two plays here. Play number one is use his really good concealment to just get dark. He's not doing that. And then play number two is keep all guns on me, and hope he can out skill me and out RNG fire me. So he's kind of opting for like the worst play possible. I mean, I'm not trying to shit on this guy, but this is something worth looking at and thinking about. Um, he's not going to be able to trade me because he's only using half his guns, and I have like now double his damage output. Um, and he's not getting dark. At the end there, obviously he couldn't because of Shima, but he could have gotten dark much sooner. Where I'm trying to play a little bit safer here because my heel's on cooldown. This Sherman, for some reason, instead of just slamming on the brakes on this island and raping my Shima, I think he like comes out here, which is kind of crazy. But you see I have a radar ready and the Sherman's coming out. There's basically no universe he's going to survive this. Um, and what I want to stress here is you're going to see two things. You see how incredibly good the arcs are. Um, Basically every turret we're hitting, one shell on this Sherman. But you can also see how kind of bad the damage output is, right, for a light cruiser with utility. I mentioned that you can hit DDs comfortably at longer ranges than you can in something like Des Moines or a Minotaur or something like that. But you can also see just kind of how kind of trash this damage output really is. I'm getting all my guns off on this guy. I'm leading fairly well. Um, and I mean that's just Nevsky. It's a light cruiser kind of in name only. You've got heavy cruiser fire starting, or in many cases worse, barely better or worse. You've got heavy cruiser DPM, and the Russians are kind of almost an unfair comparison DPM wise, right? Because the Russian cruisers, even among heavy cruisers, are somewhat unique for how long the reload is, right? Like Petro, Stalingrad, and even to some extent Moskva, but especially Petra and Stalingrad, like they have such a long reload because the AP is so demonic for a heavy cruiser, right? And Nevsky has, again, like kind of this halfway reload, right? Like most light cruisers, you've got somewhere between with reload mod, mid 3 to a 5-second reload, and Nevsky with reload mod, you have you have a lot worse DPM than a Des Moines in the Nevsky. You have again like overall a worse hull than Des Moines. Um, Much worse damage output, worse hull. The utility is about as easy to utilize. And then what happens with Nevsky is what I think the best way to sum it up is you are trading potential in the hands of a good player for ease of use. And I think that's the best way to put it. Like, is a very well played Wooster more game impactful than a very well played Nevsky in random battles? I would say 100% yes. I would say just inarguably yes. Someone who's great in Wooster is going to pump out so much more damage than someone who's great in the Nevsky in most games. and they're probably going to utilize the radar as well, if not better, against destroyers. But obviously, Worcester's much harder to play because you have to get much closer to the enemy to use the radar. It has floaty shells, right? Uh, and Nevsky is just kind of, and you see the situation that I'm in. I torped blind on the GK to just stop him from pushing, but now I'm forced to just sprint out, and I get incredibly fucking blessed here because someone just smashed the fuck out of this Satsuma, and he's not going to be able to shoot me. Um, but this fight here is going to highlight how kind of tragic this ship's damage output is. I'm starting with the AP because I want to turn this guy out. I want this guy to not use his front guns on me, but even not like at this angle because you don't have any improved penetration angles. And you see I'm kind of getting him like right in the sweet spot of where he's probably not angled enough to bounce, and I still can't, get a citadel, or I'm still ricocheting half my shells. Finally get a citadel because he went at about 45 degrees there, but this is a tragic fight. This is an extremely tragic fight because if I show at this range enough to use my back guns, Des Moines will like two-shot me with armor piercing, right? Des Moines AP is demonic. He has in this situation like even with his one back turret, he basically has my front gun DPM. Super tragic. Definitely got blessed here that my team smashed that Satsuma and then the GK died before getting around on me. That could have been very bad. And I mean, even with the torps, like I can't use the torps on a Des Moines running away. I could have torped the Satsuma assuming he had lived, but I would maybe hit one torp for like what? It's a fucking Satsuma. What am I gonna hit him for? Like 7,000 damage, right? The torps are almost exclusively I have fucked up. I have taken a bad position on a rock. A battleship is running it down on me, and maybe I have some deterrence. But I mean, I would argue that there's more deterrence in like the front guns of a Petro, the front guns of a Moskva that can citadel broadside battleships at even like short medium range. I mean, Moskva is capable of citadeling many battleships out to the 10-ish kilometer range. Petro citadels many out past that. Stalingrad obviously has like basically battleship penetration, right? I mean, so are the torps a deterrent? Yeah, they definitely can be if your ass gets pushed, but are the front guns of Moskva, Petro, and Stalin more of a deterrence to a battleship running at you? I mean, I would argue, yeah, to most battleships they are, especially if you're somewhat healthy. So I'm out of radars. I've burned through all 4 radars. And something you might have noticed is I'm running the AA 4-point skill, which hasn't really come in handy. I think probably overall something like top grade gunner is more valuable. We'll talk about that more when we look at the captain spec. But I am out of radars. I've got 1 Hydra left. This was kind of a struggle session of a game until very recently. But my Annapolis, I think, played extremely smart. He did a very good job of staying alive. You could argue he maybe should have used more radar somehow, but our battleships, if you notice throughout this game, were like borderline AFK or rock camping for the vast majority of the game. And I mean, even now with this one Pommern is on like what 50, 60k HP and is letting his cruiser on 10k HP lead the charge. His other cruiser on 15k. Kind of a strange gameplay decision. But the Annapolis did really good using that radar to force the Haru and the Edgar off. The Edgar beaches here. And then he used his Hydra at a good time too. But we're able to kind of overlap the Hydra usage here. And I mean, undeniably, a bit of a throw by the Reds here. The sub is like perma pinging, so Palmer gets to blind drop him. Edgar beaches for no fucking reason. The Haru has 8s. I think I probably would have dodged here, but yeah, he has 8-kilometer torps. And it's kind of interesting. If you think back to the time when I was stuck on this island here, GK, right, had a free push on me for free about 3 minutes into the game. Zhao had a free push on me a couple of minutes later. And what if you notice what happened? Multiple ships at sea had an opportunity to make a giant game impact, and they waited too long to do it. Uh, he who hesitates is lost, man. It is a, it is a quote for a reason. Uh, what is another one? The best time to attack is now. Uh, maybe not 100% of the time, but definitely, multiple of their ships would still be alive if any of those guys had, as they say, seized the day. So we're gonna win this one. And the game impact of the Nevsky is just undeniably strong. I mean, I'm not trying to rag on this ship. I always kind of caveat this with how I like to play the game, and I like to play the game quite aggressively, and I can play very aggressive in Stalin, Moskva, and Petro, and I think that the Nevsky lends itself the least to aggressive play. Now, there are sometimes unicorn situations where you get to push people who, like, say, don't overmatch you, right? Like maybe you're pushing like two cruisers that don't have improved pen angles, um, and you obviously are slightly more well armored than your average light cruiser. Um, and maybe you get to utilize the torps, and that's pretty cool. You obviously do deter a destroyer push a little bit more than the other Russian radar cruisers. So I mean, two games, good game impact, like decent damage and decent score. But I just think big games in Nevsky happen less. At least the way I play. I don't enjoy permakiting. I am not a damage farm mentality player. Some people, it's like they flawlessly cycle fires, right? Like they'll start a fire, switch to another battleship, start another fire on the guy they just got a fire on when his DCP runs out. Um, it's honestly just not a skill set that like I can do it like above average, but not great. I'm typically at my best pushing in on people, um, at least a little bit, or like kind of outsmarting people. And I feel like the Nevsky just doesn't really play to the way I like to play the game. Um, I mean, Dreadnought and a light cruiser, Confederate, like these are like fairly good games. Like respectable damage, respectable, low to mid 2K base XP. The utility of the Nevsky is excellent. It is excellent, and it is slightly easier to utilize just from a positioning standpoint than Moskva. The problem, like I said, comes from uh, useful positioning and using utility and staying alive while pumping out damage. The Nevsky kind of can only do three of those things. It can usefully position and use utility and stay alive by camping a rock. Okay, it can usefully position, uh, stay alive and farm damage without using its utility, right? So I think that's kind of how I look at it. You know, and I think something like the Moskva just kind of does what Nevsky does a little bit better. I said this about Des Moines versus Salem, Des Moines versus Worcester, and I think the comparison is very fair. Moskva v Nevsky. Um, Everything that Nevsky does, uh, use utility from a central position, farm damage when you have to permakite, uh, and then fuck destroyers who you do have radared out in the open. Like Nevsky does all of that basically 80 to 100% as good as the Nevsky does. Like I said, the only real difference being the buffer range between the radar and your concealment, and then you do have like 20% worse DPM when all guns are firing Moskva v Nevsky. But then Moskva can do things Nevsky can never try to do, right? Positionally hold while putting out damage. Um, really punish broadsides, including battleship broadsides. It does it much better. Farm HE, again, the effective DPM is actually higher against anything armored above 30 mil. So, yeah, well, let's go back to the port and we can look at the spec. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the equipment first. Pretty much like bog standard, main armaments, radar duration. Definitely want this. Aiming, prop mod, I think overall is better. Um, the Nevsky does not have a very good turning circle, and has a pretty okay rudder shift. I think prop mod makes you eat less shit, a little bit less shit than steering gears. That's the only real reason I run it. I reload, guys. The base range is so huge, like. Again, this is what I was talking about with like the Nevsky being maybe less impactful than other light cruisers, but easier to play. Is like they kind of gave you every handholdy gimmick they could think of, like slightly improved armor, rail guns, long range, long duration, long range radar. It's definitely like an easy ship to do pretty well in. As far as the captain build, there's definitely other things I would probably overall recommend. Um, if you've watched any of my cruiser videos, you know I take this skill a lot. Probably too much, but it is extremely hilarious. None of these two replays we looked at came in handy, but I've definitely had games in Nevsky where AA is active like half the game. So I would say overall, probably you would drop AA defense. I do think you want. I think this is kind of the standard build here. These points here that I'm encircling, and then you have these 6 points to play with. I think you can make a really strong case. Top grade gunner is probably like overall just better. And then you could take survivability expert by giving up focus fire and consumable specialist. This just gives you your radar and hydro back about 10 seconds faster, which is nice. And then combined with the AA skill, you get something like a 55-second reload on the consumables anytime planes are in your range. And the Nevsky does have improved AA duration, AA range. So like I think it's 6.9. Yeah, 6.9. So planes, even like from Nakimov, actually have to be in your AA range a good bit. Like anytime a CV wants to drop on you, this skill will be active for probably a solid 20 to 30 seconds, which is then that much bonus permanent to your consumable reload. But you know, in non-AA lobbies, obviously top grade gunner is always useful because anytime you radar, it works. Um, my dog decided to grab a squeak toy. That's pretty exciting. And then we can take a look at the armor. This is kind of where Nevsky is like fairly unique because you get this same armor scheme as something like a Moskva. Like if we pull up Moskva real quick, you notice that you have like a very similar amount of side plating. Um, Moskva obviously has a much easier to hit citadel. It's taller. But then you do have the kind of the icebreaker bow on Nevsky as well, 50 millimeter, big 25 nose. But then the problem is this upper belt of 25 and the 30 deck. You're significantly, and you do have less HP than these other cruisers, but you know it's not the HP really. It's the deck and side plating, and this makes torps like basically unusable against battleships because if you push in and they literally just aim center mass, like any battleship basically in the fucking game, it just is like, and keep in mind, here's another thing. This is gonna sound bad, but like the average battleship player is such a fucking bot that they actually aim upper belt on a lot of cruisers. Like the amount of times where I've just like pushed in on a Moskva and you know there's like a GK and he just smashes me right here and like get some pens here and like a couple of pens here and then bounces half his salvo. But like the Nevsky doesn't get to do that. Now it does kind of have troll armor we can strip away. This is covering it, but there's spacing here, like a good amount of spacing, and you have 140 outer, and then you do have another 40 on the Citadel. So like you actually have fairly good side protection. Now, obviously, does this like make any battleship not slam you? Absolutely not. But with even just a little bit of angling, you can defeat a lot of heavy cruiser AP at medium range. If you're perfectly flat, like basically every heavy cruiser in the game has the pen even at like 15 kilometers to smash you. But like just even a small amount of angling, like this is not enough to auto bounce. Obviously, just like showing 70, 60 degrees, like every shell is going to have the ability to not ricochet on you from any heavy cruiser in the game. But like by just a small amount of angling, you can kind of effectively up your side plating, effectiveness from 140 to say like 160, 170, and then this 40 up to like maybe 50. And there's actually not that many. There's really not that many heavy cruisers in the game that say at like 15 kilometers can reliably smash you when you're close to flat but not completely flat. Like now, every single battleship is like more likely to smash you because you have more. Like every battleship shell obviously does arm on this. Um, and you're reasonably thick, like you don't go flat to BBs and get away with it in Nevsky. It does not fucking happen. It can kind of happen in the Petro just because of the height above water of the Citadel and the fact that you get more protection. But I mean, Nevsky definitely blows up when you go flat, and then of course, even if you angle, um, and this is kind of the issue with the upper belt and the exposed Citadel is like if you're flat and a battleship catches you and it shoots you and you turn in, where do you take the shells? You take them on the upper belt. So then you get overmatched into the dirt, right? So turning into dodge in Nevsky is like basically impossible because you get smashed. And that's kind of a unique situation um, to any of these Russian cruisers because turning in is in many cases more effective than turning out because of the profile of the stern on a lot of these Russian cruisers. Turning out doesn't give you any benefit in the sloping of your armor. But then like in a Moskva, because you have the auto, the non-overmatchable upper belt, and you're flat, if you turn in, everything will bounce off you. But Nevsky, when you turn in, shells go high, obviously. Assume properly aimed for a Citadel, right? If shells are aimed here and you turn in, then all of a sudden they hit the water here, which means they arc in higher. I mean, this is like basic angling and shell dropping, right? So uh, turning in against battleship AP gets you smashed like 10 out of 10 times in the Nevsky. Obviously, anything with 30 mil overmatch, when you kite, you just get dumpstered, and you just don't have the maneuverability. And I want to kind of quickly sum up the issues I alluded to with this being kind of a light cruiser and kind of a heavy cruiser. You have every disadvantage I can think of that a heavy cruiser gets. You have heavy cruiser concealment, 12.8. You have heavy cruiser maneuverability, this rudder shift. It's barely better than these other, even the Russian heavy cruisers, and it's much worse than some other nations' heavy cruisers. You do have a fairly good top speed, but it's nothing like super special. I mean, all of the Russian cruisers go over 30, 36, I believe. I think even like Stalingrad, yeah, it goes 1 knot slower. Moskva goes, I think 1 knot, yeah, 1.5 knots slower. Petro goes a little bit slower, 3 knots slower, 4 knots slower. But yeah, you have the concealment, the maneuverability, the low fire starting, the low HE pen, or sorry, you have all these things issues, and then you have every issue quote unquote that a light cruiser gets. Like you have uh, you have low HE penetration. You don't have armor that can bounce even 406s really almost anywhere. Um, you don't get the light cruiser concealment. So you like every issue a ship like Worcester has is compensated for by super good concealment, super good maneuverability in the Worcester, crazy fire starting in the Worcester and other light cruisers, crazy theoretical DPM, again with 30 mil base pen. It's not effective DPM a lot of the time, but against cruisers it is. And then the Nevsky gets this super gimped 200k base HE DPM, right? So the only thing remotely special is the AP. The AP does have heavy cruiser penetration and good, very solid AP DPM. But because you don't have improved pen angles, you don't really get to make use of it a lot. The utility is like super good. It's the best utility, right? Tied with Moskva, but with better concealment, it's easier to position close enough to use it. But you're not really enabled to hold a position, and get pushed by battleships and just say fuck it, go nose in. Except that they 15k chunk you, but you have a lot of HP, good armor, good healing. You don't really get any of that. You don't really get any improved healing over these other ships. They have like the standard cruiser 50, 50 and a third, I believe, all of them. Yeah, all of them get 50 and a third. Repair and sit repair. Um, you get like closer to light cruiser torque protection along with Petro. Nothing special there. The lowest HP. Uh, it's it kind of just. I just think Moskva is like objectively superior to Nevsky almost overall. Again in randoms, clan battles comp. Nevsky is quite strong, and that's just down to the open water deterrence on DDs pushing your flank. It is superior to basically every other cruiser in the game because it can't really blow up one shot. Like there's really no way for we can look at the armor a little bit again. Um, right? There's kind of like no way to get one shot in this thing, unless you're flat, right? But like nose in, they can get super lucky plunging sits through the nose and ass, but it doesn't happen a lot. Now you eat shit from every angle, but you're resilient to one click ability, right? That other light cruisers aren't. Like other light cruisers can get blown up through the nose and ass. The Nevsky can't. So it does have that resiliency. But then the problem is the closer you get, or against anything with 30 mil overmatch, it goes through the deck and fucks you. So yeah, that's kind of my overall thoughts on the Nevsky. It's probably my least favorite of the four. Overall strength wise and like game impact, I'd say kind of middle of the road. In high DD lobbies where you do have some teammates helping you and you're holding a flank, you do hold it a little bit better probably than most of these. Um, I kind of say middle of the road. Middle of the road, and to me, not super fun. I don't really enjoy AFK HE spamming, and if you do like that, then there's just so many ships that do that better. Again, with Moskva, kind of does kite farming better. Crazy as that is. Oh, and then one other downside is you kind of get like the turret traverse. Like this is with I think we took Grease the Gears, didn't we? Yeah, this is with Grease the Gears. 70-second turret traverse. Basically a heavy cruiser or close to it, right? So kind of a cross between a light and a heavy cruiser, but in my opinion, it has all of the quote-unquote issues light cruisers get that balance them, and all of the issues that balance heavy cruisers, and it combines them with a really good utility suite that kind of is cope for the issues that the Nevsky has. And anyway, next video we will take a look at the Petro. We'll do the tech trees first, then we'll look at the steel and the coal versions. Yeah, thank you for watching.